hearing this?
Anybody hear that?
How can we possibly have the slightest idea what to expect?
Well, we're back.
Hold on to your butts.
Welcome to the Jurassic Park podcast. I'm your host, Brad Jost, and we're here to discuss all things Jurassic, including the movies, TV shows, music, toys, and more. In episode 401, Conor O'Keefe is back with another installment of DINO DNA, this time covering the Majungasaurus and the Carnotaurus. Now, Conor has an awesome chat lined up for us today featuring Tom Jurassic, and I know I can absolutely always count on the two of them to relay some of the best dinosaur information around, so stay tuned for that. They're going to talk about the Majungasaurus, which is one of the more later additions, I guess, to the on-screen dinosaur list, as it was featured in Season 2 of Jurassic World Chaos Theory. And the Carnotaurus, well, it's got a long history in the Jurassic franchise, so I can't wait to learn all about the real species. And of course, while you're listening to this episode, hit us up on Blue Sky, Facebook, and Instagram to continue that conversation from today's episode. And as always, please check out our live streams over on YouTube, discussing all of the latest Jurassic news from around the world, Wednesday nights, 9 p.m. EST each and every week. Also, be sure to subscribe to my newsletter for all things Jurassic, movies, TV, my other podcasts, and other thoughts and appearances. You can find the link to the newsletter on JurassicParkPodcast.com/newsletter. But it is time, so let's go ahead and dive into the conversation between Conor and Tom as they chat about the dinosaurs Majungasaurus and Carnotaurus.
Well, maybe dinosaurs have more in common with present-day birds than they do with reptiles.
You do understand these are actual animals, right?
You read about them in books, you see the bones in museums, but you don't really believe it.
You should hear a 4-year-old try to say Archaeornithomimus.
I read both of your books. You liked dinosaurs back then.
All vertebrate embryos are inherently female anyway. They just require an extra hormone given at the right developmental stage to make them male.
You know that I'm not at liberty to reveal the asset's genetic makeup. Nothing in Jurassic World is natural.
You will see a herd of the first dinosaurs on our tour, called Dilophosaurus.
How would you classify it, Billy?
Suchomimus, snow.
No, think bigger.
Baryonyx.
Spinosaurus aegypti. Actually, Charlie, those are herbivores. They really wouldn't be interested in fighting with each other. But these ones here are carnivores, and they really like fighting with each other. They use their teeth and their claws to rip each other's throats out.
He's 3. Let's wait till he's 5.
Hello everybody and welcome back to DINO DNA, the show where we look at the real world animals that inspired the creatures that we see in the Jurassic films and TV shows, and we have a look at their designs and see how they stack up against what we know from the paleontology. For today's episode, we're going to be looking at the Abelisaurs. So there's 2 species that we're looking at today, both from the Jurassic World era. 2 of my favorite dinosaurs, actually, and I'm joined by the omnipresent, the ever-present Tom Jurassic as well. How are you doing, Tom?
I'm good. I am indeed omnipresent. I am everywhere, Conor. Every time you add a new dinosaur to your shelf, I am there watching.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think we did this bit last time, but it doesn't get old because you have been on like 3 consecutive episodes on the show since, so like, yeah, I'm sure it still holds up.
It's all good. It's fine. Like I'm practically new here.
Yeah. We're just starting over again.
What podcast is this again?
This is the Jurassic Park podcast, Tom. You've been here for about 8 years.
Oh wow.
So, for those of you who've maybe not listened before, you're new to the segment, obviously Tom's here, as he's on every segment. But
every segment until the end of time.
Essentially, we're going to be looking at the history of these 2 species as they've appeared in the Jurassic franchise. We're going to start with some basic stats about the real world animals, and then we're going to get into talking about their physical appearances and what we know of their behavior as well. Now, just the regular kind of disclaimer, we're huge fans of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World, and these designs as well. I'm a really big fan of both of these designs, even though they deviate a little bit from what we know from the fossil records. This is more of a fun look at the animals that inspired them, and hopefully you'll learn a few things about the real-world dinosaurs. So I mentioned at the top, we're looking at the Abelisaurs. So you might have heard of that word, but that isn't what they're called in the shows, because we're looking at two specific species. Now, Abelisaurs are theropod dinosaurs, mainly known from the Cretaceous period, and they're found in the southern hemisphere. So they're found all across the southern continent of Gondwana back in the Mesozoic era. But that's basically modern day South America, Africa, India, and Madagascar. And essentially, these are theropods that are relatively large, normally taller than a human being, for example. So quite big for a modern day animal. They're quite stocky. And they have very stunted snouts and very short limbs. So unless it's in the episode name, you might be pieced together which dinosaurs we're talking about today. It's Carnotaurus and Majungasaurus, which are two amazing dinosaurs. So yeah, Tom, what do you think of these two dinosaurs?
Well, I was going to say to you, just on the... is it Abelisaurus? Is that how you say the family?
I pronounce it Abelisaurs, but
that's how I've heard it. So Abelisaurus.
Yeah,
I've heard other people say it that way, so I think that's right.
But they are named after a paleontologist called Roberto Abel, which makes it tricky.
Okay.
He was Argentinian.
I'm going to go with
so...
Abelisaurus then.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that's interesting is, so obviously for anyone who's heard these before, you know that we have show notes. And it's interesting seeing that you've put that Rajasaurus, Rugops, and Scorpiovenator are also from this group of animals.
Yeah.
Purely because thinking about the toys, which obviously both of us are very invested in, it's interesting seeing that Mattel decided to make a lot of dinosaurs from this kind of family of dinosaurs in a relatively short period of time. Like what is going on? Rajasaurus and Rugops appeared in pretty much the same wave, I think, and I think Scorpiovenator wasn't that far after. So
and they've done another one since. It looks like a grey Carnotaur. It's called I don't even know how to pronounce that. Starts with an E.
I think it's Excrinosaur or something similar.
Something like that. It's got a crazy name. But yeah, they've really kind of they are diving deep generally in the line, but yeah, they have really produced quite a lot of these. And then also, I think a couple of these were in the Indominus Rex's genomes as well.
I think so, yeah.
I'm not sure, maybe Rugops, maybe Majungasaurus, but yeah, they were definitely listed somewhere.
I think Majungasaurus was. I love doing these little bits on the sides here because so interestingly, Hertfordshire Zoo has a section on the Indominus Rex.
Okay.
I have questions there, but those are for another segment. But it says that the genus of the Indominus included Carnotaurus, Giganotosaurus, Majungasaurus, Rugops, Ferrozinosaurus, Velociraptor, and Tyrannosaurus Rex.
So 3 Abelisaurs in total then.
3, which is quite interesting because I don't think you'd think that with its long and slender arms and fingers.
Yeah. I guess its snout is kind of it's quite rounded, which is like a big trait of these as well. Yeah. And then we'll talk a bit later as well about their skin covering, what we know about that, which is which could also be part of the inspiration for that design as well, maybe. But yeah, let's get into kind of the history of these animals in the film. So do you want to take us through where we see these animals in?
Yeah, sure. So Carnotaurus, obviously, as everyone will know, it first appears in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. It then carries across into Jurassic World Dominion, where we see it in Malta during the Black Market sequence. And it's then also featured heavily in Camp Cretaceous. Now, Connor's put a note here about Toro being arguably the most recognisable dinosaur in a non-movie part of the Jurassic franchise, and I would agree with that. I think Toro's on the McDonald's packaging from the Camp Cretaceous era. He's on a lot of the box art. He's definitely present across a lot of their kind of packaging from that era. Now, obviously, you've got the iconic Demon Carnotaur toy, which has recently got.
I was going to say that Carnotaur just generally is probably the most iconic dinosaur that wasn't in a film for so long. Because Demon Carnotaur, it was in the Lost World novel, the Lost World video games. It was like a toy in the Lost World. Like it was everywhere, but in the films for so many years.
Well, I mean, isn't Conor in Disney's Dinosaur?
Yes. Yeah.
So it has quite a prevalent role in that as well, and I think that's kind of brought a level of infamy to the dinosaur.
Yeah, it's pretty iconic.
So it's an interesting one, and obviously, I mean, with Demon Carno, for example, we're seeing it reimagined currently in the Jurassic World Reimagined line. So clearly, it's a very popular animal.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the name Carnotaurus, Carnotaurus sastri means meat-eating bull, which is named after its horns and carnivorous teeth. The species name is actually after the owner of the ranch it was found on. So that's quite interesting. So it was found on a ranch. Where was it found, Conor?
So this was in Argentina. To be honest, actually, a lot of dinosaur discoveries in South America are found on ranches.
That makes sense.
You've got, especially around this part of the country as well. So this is La Colonia Formation. Sorry, I mispronounced it.
This is the episode of great pronunciation.
But even like things like titanosaurs, like their bones are quite often exposed just underneath the surface. So they'll sometimes actually be spotted by the farmers and ranchers, and then are kind of reported to paleontologists and stuff.
Yeah.
This one was discovered by an Argentinian paleontologist, Jose Bonaparte. And it was also discovered alongside Amargasaurus, which is also in Jurassic World Evolution 2, and is a Mattel figure of that as well. But was something really interesting.
Appears in an upcoming novel?
Yes, it does. But something really cool is that Carnotaurus is only known from one specimen. Only one has ever been found, which is insane how popular it is. It's based on one fossil, which is it was a very, very complete fossil, which is just why we know so much kind of from that one fossil.
Does that suggest that their species wouldn't have been particularly prevalent in their sort of ecosystem?
It's a great question. It's really hard to say, to be honest, because there's all sorts of reasons that animals won't fossilize. Basically a tiny minority of animals that have ever lived ever fossilized, basically, because it has to be the perfect conditions for them to be instantly covered, not decomposed, covered by sand, water, sediment, that sort of thing, and then basically not kind of uplifted or crushed during millions of years of geological movement. So it can be quite hard to draw those sorts of conclusions. And I mean, to be honest, who knows, there could be a bunch of them just slightly over there where people haven't checked.
Waiting to be discovered. No, that makes sense.
It's hard to say. I mentioned that it was found in the same kind of project as Amargasaurus, and that's sort of reflective of its environment when it was alive. So it lived in the late Cretaceous, around 72 to 64 million years ago. And it would have lived on coastal plains alongside sauropods, but also hadrosaurs and ankylosaurs as well. A very, very kind of different looking place than what it looks like now, which is quite arid.
I definitely have a lot more questions, but I imagine we will answer them over the course of this segment.
Hopefully. Keep a mind on them. But actually, you mentioned about the Demon Carnotaur coming out this year, and that was one of the reasons why I thought it was really important to do this episode. We're recording in 2024, just in case it comes out next year. It's been a big year for Carnotaurus. We've had Carnotaurus, the Demon Carnotaur, the Hammond Collection Carnotaur.
Beautiful Hammond Collection
it's
figure.
Very, very nice. And then the Majungasaurus, the other animal we're speaking about, made its debut, shall we say, in Chaos Theory. So this is a big year for the Abelisaurs in Jurassic. Do we want to quickly talk about that one as well?
So I was going to jump in because, as you say, it debuted in Chaos Theory Season 2 this year. So we had a Majungasaurus who was called Major. But beforehand, it had also appeared as a Mattel toy, although the design was rather different. And it appeared in Jurassic World Evolution and Jurassic World Evolution 2. And it's interesting to note that it's mentioned as contributing its genome towards the Indominus Rex.
Yeah.
And I also, let me just do a quick Google. I feel like... Was this one of the ones that was on the original? No, it wasn't. Interesting. So I thought there might have been an image of this one on the original Jurassic World website, but I'm thinking of the Metriacanthosaurus.
yeah. Similar name.
Majonga never appeared in the same way that other animals which eventually made the jump into the films appeared in the viral marketing, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
So the name Majongasaurus crenatissimus... I'm just going to go with that.
It's pretty good.
Which means Majunga lizard most notched is named after a nearby city in Madagascar.
I've got something to just contribute in this section. I've been to that city.
Oh wow!
Yeah, yeah. So it's in kind of like northeastern Madagascar. It's pronounced Mahajanga.
Okay, there we go. Mahajanga.
But yeah, no, it's like this one. I really like Majongasaurus because like I did field work for my Bachelor of Science degree in Madagascar. I was doing an ecology kind of study on lemurs in Madagascar. Yeah. So yeah, and going to Mahajanga, be like, oh my god, they found a dinosaur near here. And one of the scientists I was working with there, he was on a dig as well in his spare time where they were actually excavating Majongasaurus as well. And
that's so cool.
That was super cool to talk to him about. Like it was really interesting. So yeah,
that is really cool. Yeah, super cool. We go. You are a well-travelled explorer of the dinosaur realm. So, Majongasaurus would have lived during the late Cretaceous period, so about 70 to 66 million years ago. So a little bit of crossover with the Carnotaurus there. And I can't even say the proper country now. Madagascar was an island back then, as it is now, and it was separated from India about 20 million years ago. So it explains why Majongasaurus was more similar to Indian Abelisaurus than South American and African variants of the species. So that's quite interesting. It's something I always find fascinating with dinosaurs, is their geographical location and how it affects their sort of physiology and their behavioural traits and all of that kind of stuff, because it's something that I don't think we really talk about a lot, but obviously within the Jurassic franchise, for example, you have Pyroraptor with feathers because it's presented in an Arctic environment, which is quite interesting. So I think that's an interesting area of paleontology I'd like to learn more about. Yeah,
and in specific regard to this one, like that's all. There's a lot of really good studies on this sort of thing called it's called island speciation, where it's like when you're separated from a mainland, you evolve in a very different way. A really good example is Harteg Island, which is in Europe. Well, it was an island. It's now in modern day Romania, where all of the dinosaurs got very small, but all the pterosaurs got really big, like Hatzegoprix. That's a great example. But specifically with Madagascar, it already separated from mainland India at this point, and that's also why you see with like going back to even the modern day. Even though it's right next to Africa, like with all of the animals and like the plants, they're much more closely associated with those that you find in Asia. You find animals that you would never find on the African mainland, but they have similar mammalian relatives in Asia as well. Madagascar's always been like an insane like biodiversity hotspot, so it's so cool to know that in the Mesozoic era it was still so badass.
It's cool to hear that and to think about kind of how that's almost a scientific outlier, right? In the sense that it's had that physical proximity to one ecosystem and then it now has physical proximity to another. Because that is kind of our whole understanding of evolution, is that the environment that something grows in really has a massive impact on all of its characteristics. So if you've over the period of time being in two different environments, that creates a whole microcosm for something that isn't seen anywhere else, doesn't it?
Yeah. And like
I
think,
just throw out like scientific sounding sentences on these segments, so it sounds like I know what I'm talking about.
I was going to build naturally on it. That was a good one. That was a good one.
Go for it.
That's absolutely it. And like Madagascar, it's an island. It looks small next to Africa, but it's massive. Like it's essentially a continent unto itself. So that stuff can happen there. But yeah, just before we kind of move on to like talking about the animals themselves, just wanted to quickly talk about like the absolute kind of mess that was the Majungasaurus kind of backstory in history with its discovery. So like...
You mean to tell me it wasn't discovered on the dig that your colleague was doing?
It has a very long and very messy kind of history of classification, sadly. So the first kind of fragments of what we now know as Majungasaurus they included teeth, were discovered all the way back in 1896. And these, I should also say that a lot of these early discoveries were a product of French colonization of Madagascar. They were discovered by French paleontologists. A lot of the paleontologists that now make discoveries in Madagascar are from Madagascar. But this is the historical context. But yeah, back in 1896, they thought it was a type of Megalosaurus because they found the big teeth and they compared it with the Megalosaurus teeth that were found in the UK.
So presumably is that because Megalosaur was one of the only prevalent dinosaur finds at that time?
Correct. Yeah. This is still quite early on. You know, the word dinosaur had only been coined like 30 to 40 years before this. You know. So yeah, I probably shouldn't have just thrown that ballpark figure out there. Someone's going to call me up on it. I'll have to back check myself there.
This whole section's getting cut out.
Oh man! Just moving on quickly. In the 1950s, they found more kind of jaws. More French paleontologists found jaws. Found out that it wasn't a megalosaur, so they named it a Majungasaurus. But in the 1970s, part of it's really, and we're going to talk about this, it's got a really thick skull. So thick that people thought it was a pachycephalosaur. And they called it Majungatholus. So a different name, still named after a nearby town. But then in the 90s, in 1996, there's been a big kind of long kind of lasting project there that I think still might be going, led by David Cruz and the Stony Brook State University in collaboration with the University of the capital of Madagascar, which is called Antananarivo. They found a lot more of the remains, which then basically started piecing together those different parts, went, oh, that's not a megalosaur. Oh, that's not a pachycephalosaur. Actually, this is all one thing. It's Majungasaurus.
Wow. It's interesting seeing that, because I was going to say, I know obviously with Megalosaurus as the prime example, it was originally thought to be a quadruped, so it's very easy for scientific knowledge to kind of evolve over time as you discover more specimens of a fossil, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a good comparison because they literally mistook this for a Megalosaurus, which was also mistaken for something else.
Yeah.
Oh man, I've just had to have a little look. The word dinosaur was coined in 1842. I was off by about 50 years. No, I was off by about 10 years because I said up to
you were close. You were close.
All right, let's talk about the dinosaurs that we see in the films and shows.
Yeah, sure thing.
So it'd be good to start off with just their kind of like general appearance and essentially how big they are, because they're quite big in the shows.
I think it's interesting because I think with Fallen Kingdom, especially with the Carno, it does very clearly set it in like a medium dinosaur class, because the thing I always think of is the contrast between the Carno and the Rex. And I actually have the Rex and Carno statues that Prime 1 made. Yeah. And you can just see them together. The scale is quite drastically different. So it gives you a good sense for, in universe, the fact that the Carno is not at that massive apex theropod size. It's somewhere underneath that.
Yeah. So I'm pleased that they did do that. It is very and like same with the Majungasaurus, they're both definitely not T-Rex scale.
Yeah.
But they are definitely oversized compared to what we currently know about them.
Yeah.
So the kind of maximum kind of sizes for Carnotaurus is around 8 meters that we know of. A Majunga was about 7 meters. Now the DPG website on like the Adopt a Dino kind of bit, they list the Carnotaurus as around 10.4 meters.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So yeah, like it's definitely oversized, but you're absolutely right. They haven't gone crazy. It's not like a huge monster version, but it's definitely a lot bigger. But it makes sense in the context of the films because it kind of has to share the screen with a T-Rex. So if it was the actual size, that scene in which the T-Rex takes it out it'd be like, well, yeah, no, that seems a bit rough, actually. It'd be like bullying, basically.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but I was going to say on that, I'm interested. Is there anything else that it kind of shares with the T-Rex that wouldn't be as accurate then? Because I feel like that sort of square off perhaps sets specific parameters on how the Conor needs to appear in the film.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that what we know about Carnotaurus from the fossil record, it was probably quite a lightweight animal. The one we see in the film is very, very robust, very muscly. The one in the fossil record had quite long, slender legs. And then basically what they've done, it feels like, you mentioned earlier, the Disney dinosaur film. It almost feels like they've used that, which is also incredible design, but they've used that as inspiration for this one. And the funny story about that was in Disney Dinosaur, that was meant to be a T-Rex. And then, that was meant to be a T-Rex, which would have made so much sense. But then they were like, oh, we need to make something distinct so people don't compare us to Jurassic Park and stuff. So they made it a Carnotaur, but they kept the T-Rex size and robustness. So it's like a snake eating its own tail in a way. Like it's a design based on something that was based on the T-Rex.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
And I guess with that as well, right? That's sort of science versus iconography because they want you to actually recognize the design. And if there's people who have seen dinosaur before, they might think, oh, actually, I recognize that dinosaur, so I'll check out this Jurassic film. Totally. And it's like that's the film that made Carnotaurus iconic, I think, for a lot of people. 100%.
So that makes total sense. I mean, but if we were to switch over to Majunga, and what we'll do for the rest of the show, we'll kind of switch between them. So listeners, do bear with us. But because these animals are, relatively similar, we'll kind of switch between them. So the Majunga in real life would have been more robust than the Carnotaurus. It would have been more heavy set than the Carnotaurus, and lots of muscle attachment points on its neck and shoulders. So it meant it was quite like a strong dinosaur. And then also it had stockier, less slender legs. And I actually think that the design they've got in Chaos Theory really nails this.
It does. It feels like it has a very backwards focused center of gravity. Like there's a lot of stomach and chest hanging over the dinosaur.
Yeah.
It's a bit like me when I eat one too many pies.
Majunga's been at it on that boat. Who knows what's... There wasn't just lettuces on that boat. But it's really like... It's like a battering ram kind of shape, isn't it? It's like, especially with those tiny arms tucked in at the side, they've done a really good job, I think, of kind of translating its really odd, kind of like quite streamlined, but quite like bulky body. It's like a torpedo almost of a dinosaur. And they've translated that quite nicely.
Yeah, it has quite an aggressive posture, which brings questions to the forefront of my mind that will be more applicable when we talk about behavior later. But it's it's a very unique dinosaur when you compare it to anything else that's out there, really, I think.
Yeah, I think they really nailed it at making it, like you see it on screen and you don't think it's a Carnotaurus. They make that immediately obvious. Like they did a good job of differentiating the designs. Which is useful because, like, obviously they've had Carnotaurus in the same animation style, so it's good that they've been able to kind of differentiate the two.
I'm quite interested. So I'm looking at my Hammer collection Carnotaurus on my shelf.
Yeah.
And I'm then looking at the Majunga.
Yeah.
And I've got to admit, in the arm department, I'm feeling sorry for the Majunga. Like, there's this Hammond collection figure that's got a relatively normal proportioned arm, all things considered.
Yeah.
Still fairly short, but not as short as it could be. But this Majunga just looks like he's lost something in the race for the DNA quest. So talk a little about that. What's like...
Yeah.
Is there anything specific with the hands that gives them that smaller appearance? I always think of it as not being particularly useful, but I guess is there a use for them that I'm just not understanding?
The answer is most likely no. So yeah, the arms are really fascinating for both of these animals because they're what you would call vestigial. So that's like a trait in evolution that used to be present in like the ancestors of a certain lineage that are no longer really used anymore. So a great example is actually if you look at whale skeleton, like the big whale skeleton in the main hall of the Natural History Museum, you will see very, very small hind limb bones placed right underneath the spine. Whales do not have hind limbs anymore, but those bones are still present on its skeleton as a remnant of the ancestors that once walked on land. So
that makes sense.
What we're kind of seeing with Abelisaurs is they've descended from theropods that had longer arms, and they are no longer needing those arms. So they're vestigial. And yeah, you're right. The hands are very strange. Like everyone clowns on T-Rex for having tiny arms. Now Abelisaurs had more fingers than a T-Rex had 2 fingers, but these guys, they had 4 fingers, but they probably didn't have any claws on any of their fingers, and the fingers attached directly to their arm bones. There were no kind of little hand bones, so carpalia, like what we have. So it was literally like your fingers connected to your wrist. So they couldn't grasp. Most of the fingers didn't have claws, if not all of them. And a lot of them, so with Majunga, its hands, two of the things were actually internal. So they didn't really even come out at all. And I hate to say it, but like the Hammond Collection Carnotaurus is my favorite figure they've ever done. They made the arms bigger on the toy than they are in the film. In the film, the arms are smaller than they are on the toy. I understand because it's a toy and they wanted articulation, but the core line Carnotaurus arms are way more accurate.
They're a lot more accurate. Yeah, that is an interesting disparity in the toy, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie to you. I had my head in my hands for part of that description because I just had a really weird image of a Carno trying to wave going around in my head the whole time.
I mean, that's like, if you've watched Prehistoric Planet, if anyone's watched Prehistoric Planet, that's literally in there. That's a really nice little scene. It's like speculative kind of paleontology. Yeah. So like, I'm sure some people listen, but like, no, they use them for like mating rituals. It's like, that's a theory that's been put out there, which is based on modern day birds and it makes for a lovely scene in the show and stuff. And obviously these things aren't done without any kind of evidence or forethought at all. But there's nothing solid in the fossil record that suggests they were used for that. But it's a nice, I think it's a really nice suggestion that adds some color to these animals' lives other than just running around eating things.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. The thing I find most interesting, I think, with them is the skulls, because I feel like I've seen a Carno skull in person somewhere before.
Yeah.
And I feel like the thing that always stands out to me, especially within the Jurassic context, and I don't know if there's any truth to this, is that they always make me think of Atrociraptors as well. In the sense of being kind of quite condensed, quite almost predatorial in a sense, where they sort of feel rugged. Like the descriptive word that's coming to my mind is a bulldog. I just feel like they're kind of quite bulky and quite ruggedly designed. So is that for anything specific? Like, is that a specific natural trait of these animals?
Yeah, I mean, so that's such a good point to pick up on. And yeah, the Atrociraptor, in terms of like the Dromaeosaur lineage, has something similar to this compared to like a Velociraptor. And yeah, no, it's this is a trait that is like a staple of the Abelisaurs. So they, across the boards, they all had these, like, as you've mentioned, like quite stout, very high but shallow snouts, essentially. Yes. And so basically, there's lots of kind of stress tests and like kind of studies that have been done on different like carnivore skulls and stuff. And what the kind of thought is that these skulls were useful for, because also it's worth mentioning here is that they're always quite armored and have quite a lot of texture on the snout as well, which meant they were quite rough and heavy as well. These were kind of good for going head on, like biting and holding onto things, withstanding force and twisting chunks of flesh off, as opposed to when you get more kind of longer, narrower snouts like our megalosaurs or allosaurs. You know, those are good for kind of running in, slashing like a hatchet and letting your prey bleed. These Abelisaurs they were grabbing onto things, and they were like you mentioned it, like a bulldog, like a Rottweiler. They're not letting go.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So they have really muscly necks as well to like back up this like powerhouse of the skull.
So it's interesting because contrasting that with something like T-Rex, where you have the bite force that's its main attacking feature. With these, they're going to be much more sort of like dirty in the fight, kind of shaking things about, trying to use momentum to really win a battle.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. They don't have that, like, if anyone's listened to our previous episode of Dino DNA with Ethan Harvey, we spoke a lot about the extreme bite force that tyrannosaurs had. Now, these Abelisaurs, they didn't have that specifically. Their bite force was nothing to be sniffed at. We'll talk a little bit about that. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. These were kind of bruisers in a way as well. Sense. So yeah, they probably had quite a lot of kind of flexibility in their snouts and skulls as well, which meant that they could withstand a lot of pressure and like torsion and twisting from prey. It's interesting though, because like there's different kind of studies and different kind of schools of thought on specific Carnotaurus and its bite force, where some kind of schools of thought kind of think that it was capable of like kind of not very strong bites, but more quick ones for capturing small prey. However, there's been other stress tests that have shown it still has a bite force that was equivalent to 2 times that of an American alligator, which is the biggest bite force on the planet currently, which implies that it probably could have bitten larger prey. So the kind of jury's out. But another thing to bear in mind about the skull of a Carnotaurus is that the one, as I mentioned, there was one that was found. It was quite distorted when it was excavated as well, and it got, millions of years of pressure. So it probably would have been a bit more robust than what the fossil looks like, which is quite thin and narrow.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's interesting with Conor especially, right? Because, I mean, when you think of Conor, you do think of the 2 horns. I think that, like Majunga, for example. Like Majunga, I don't think it necessarily has anything that's as much of a defining feature, at least in my opinion. But I do think Conor is quite unique with that. Like, even when you look at, say, the Excrinosaurus or whatever it is, the other Abelisaurus that we referenced, that has horns as well, but they're a lot shorter. So it seems like Carno, for whatever reason, is the one Abelisaur where the horns are really its defining trait, I'd say.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah, there's something that is common across the whole group is what you kind of call ornamentation. That's call it, on their skulls. So that's
we are really struggling this episode.
This is a tough one for pronunciations. But yeah, like, so that's kind of the rough textures and the kind of like it's almost like armor on their skulls. And yeah, in Carnotaurus, it's kind of shown up as these incredible, like iconic, they're iconic kind of the horns. But Majunga actually did have a horn, and it is on the Chaos Theory design. It's like a unicorn horn almost.
It's in the center.
It's right in the middle, not as defined, but yeah, it is there, which is really, really interesting. So there's been kind of some kind of studies and research and kind of opinions made on what was the point of having these really intricate skulls. Majungasaurus is known from loads of skulls, unlike Carnotaurus. So they have that horn in the middle. They've got a rounded nose with lots of like kind of rough textures on it as well.
Yeah.
But the thing is that nose, that thing that they originally thought was a Pachycephalosaurus as well, that was actually quite hollow. So it probably wasn't used for like butting heads like a Pachycephalosaur.
Because it would cave in.
Exactly. So it was probably, as we've kind of discussed, it would have helped when they were kind of grabbing onto prey and withstanding that kind of damage as well. But then also probably used for sexual selection. So males had these, ornamentations on their heads, like the horns and stuff, and it would have been quite useful to kind of show off to potential mates. Like prehistoric plants showed the arms, but these are things that probably would have helped to show like good health and stuff. But then also they might have existed alongside other Abelisaurs in their kind of habitat, and having really distinct different skull shapes. If you see a silhouette in the distance, you want to know if that's one of your species and you are okay around them, or not one of your species, you got to get out of there.
Yeah.
That's a really useful way of distinguishing yourself at kind of ranges as well.
It's an evolutionary trait that you see across different dinosaur species, because the one I always think of is ceratopsians, and how much variety there is in the different skulls despite them being from the same family.
Yeah, absolutely. That's and hadrosaurs as well, like these incredible kind of skulls. So just before we kind of move on from the skulls, because they're super interesting, but there's a lot else to talk about. Just a few other bits and bobs that we know from taking scans of the internal brain case of a Carnotaurus skull, that they had larger olfactory bulbs when compared to optic lobes, which meant that they would have probably depended on sense of smell more than sight, which is really
interesting.
And then also when we're talking about Majungasaurus as well, is that their teeth had quite an interesting shape. They were curved on the front, but straight on the back. So as opposed to like allosaurs, where they're curved around the back and have kind of serrated edge for slashing, this means that these teeth were a little bit more similar to what we see from like T-Rex, in which they were good for kind of puncturing and holding rather than slashing and cutting. So that kind of reinforces that theory that they would have been better for holding on to their prey.
Like dog with a bone is exactly what I've got in my mind.
Yeah, precisely. And then like one of my favorite things about that we can find from fossils, so we were talking about this in the T-Rex episode as well, is that we have found tooth marks from Majungasaurus in sauropod fossils.
Oh wow.
So that means that at the very least they would have scavenged sauropods, but they could potentially have hunted them as well, but there's no direct evidence for that. But it's really cool when you find that stuff, it's so valuable to see those interactions between species.
I find it interesting from a behavioural trait as well, right?
Yeah.
Because if you think of a sauropod, they're quite a lumbering creature.
Yeah.
So it would take them a while to react to an attack.
Yeah.
And actually, if we're saying that Abelisaurs could have potentially done several quick, succinct strikes with their jaws, actually that might be enough to deplete that creature's energy entirely.
Yeah. If they're like grabbing like different parts but nearby of the sauropod, grabbing, twisting, pulling at a time, then that's going to do immense amounts of damage. Yeah.
And there we go. Gareth, that's what we want from your sequel.
Oh, I'd love to see a Majunga in live action. It would be a brutal animal, because should we talk a bit about how it behaves as well?
Yeah, let's go into it, man.
Yeah, you were thinking of something earlier that you wanted to ask about the Majunga. Do you want to start off with that?
So that is a very good question. Let me scroll back up our notes so I can prompt myself with what I was thinking. So when it comes to the behavior specifically, I guess I remember exactly what it was. So the posture to me suggests that it would be a fight starter, because it just has that kind of forward-facing posture of something that's going to be very aggressive.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to whether that's accurate, because it's definitely how it's presented in Chaos Theory. It kind of, whenever the campers encounter it, it chases them. So is that reflective of what we understand it to have actually been like?
Somewhat, yeah. So because they've found so much like fossil evidence for Majungasaurus, There is lots of like really cool things about some of those specimens that have given us an insight into their lives. So number one, as well, it's worth saying this, that they would have been an apex predator.
Oh wow. Okay.
So that meant that while they wouldn't have had any kind of predators of a different species, there may have been some kind of fights between them, being at the top of the food chain. But yeah, on that note, really about them kind of being bruisers. So there is a lot of specimens that have been found with broken bones that have healed over, and even one that had a tail that had broken off. So it literally has been severed, right? So like,
oh my God.
When we're thinking about those things, it's like, well, what other animal in their environment could have done that? If they're the apex predator, they're either, they're injuring themselves, they're extremely clumsy, or they're doing it to each other. So all of this evidence of this kind of rough and tumble life shows us that probably Majungasaurus did kind of have a lot of kind of intra-species combat, essentially.
I find that so interesting because I think just with dinosaurs more broadly, I don't think people think enough about the fact that although creatures might have been the same species, they would have still fought, especially when it comes to predators.
Yeah.
So I think that's really an interesting juxtaposition on some of the other animals that existed.
Yeah, and there's something it does in Camp Cretaceous specifically, because there's major.
Wait! You said I need to catch you. There's something it does in chaos theory specifically.
Oh yes, always. I'm never gonna get over that. Yes, in chaos theory.
At least you know I'm listening to you.
Yeah. He's paying attention, guys. So yeah, in chaos theory, there are two Majungasaurus, and they share a scene together. And what happens in that scene?
Oh, don't they end up fighting?
They do end up fighting, and not only do they end up fighting, is that you have a one of the crew members is like, oh, it killed the other one.
Yes. Yeah.
So this is really interesting because we have found Majungasaurus tooth marks on other Majungasaurus skeletons that haven't healed.
Oh.
So
potentially the death blow.
Yeah, potentially death blow.
Yeah.
But then also cannibalization is potentially what was at play as well. So this was in 2007, this was discovered. And if this is evidence of cannibalization, it's the only fossil evidence that we have of a non-bird theropod doing this, which is really, really interesting. Now, that said, it doesn't mean that other species didn't do it. It's just that this is the only one we have kind of evidence.
There's evidence for,
Yeah. So like other reptiles like Komodo dragons, they've been kind of recorded kind of battling each other when resources are low, and then the winner eating the body of the one that has died. So it happens in nature in the modern day. So it's not out of the question that Majungasaurus would have done this. And that was a really cool detail they put in the show.
That is really cool. This is maybe potentially going too far into it, but you might be able to speculate on this. But would that boil down to the physiology of the creature? Like, so where we're saying it's so aggressive, for example, let's say it gets enough adrenaline from that constant aggression, would that then make it more likely to become a cannibal because there's just so much of that chemical that it sort of overtakes its body?
It's very hard to say. With fossil evidence, we don't get much of a read on things like hormones and such. But given that the way it's observed in modern day reptiles is generally due to there being a lack of food, it could be like a drought that's happening and there's just not enough prey around. That's probably the more likely one. It would, for one Majungasaurus to hunt or attack another one for food, that is such a risky hunt. Like, animals are like us, they're risk-averse creatures. They go for whatever the easiest meal is that they're adapted to eat. And I imagine trying to kill another Majungasaurus is not an easy feat because of those exact reasons of how they're well adapted to kind of, biting and tearing and such. So I think it would probably, this is pure speculation, but it would have been more likely that they're driven to it because of environmental factors.
It's, like worst case scenario.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting creature, really interesting. We don't know much about that at all from Carnotaurus because we only have that one specimen.
Is everything we understand about the Carno hypothetical then in comparison to that?
So it's not completely hypothetical because it's one really, really well kind of preserved specimen that's almost complete. So there's a lot of studies that can be done on there. So we wouldn't know really about their relations between each other based on kind of fossil evidence, but looking at its kind of physiology and stuff, we'd probably know quite a lot around like what I've kind of already said around that, their heads might not have been used for butting because they might not have been strong enough. But then again, they could have like kind of pushed each other with their heads and that sort of thing. Like modern marine iguanas have those similar kind of ornamentation, kind of really rough skulls. Or they could have like hit each other on the body because they have that head and those horns as well. But we've got no kind of direct evidence because we just have one individual. Yeah.
It's kind of our best speculation based on the modern day ecosystem, right?
Yeah. And it's very unlikely they would have used those horns for hunting just because their placement directly above their eyes is quite a dangerous place. So if
you get that wrong, you're losing an eye.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And as we know, their eyesight wasn't the tip top, but you still kind of, it's useful to have your eyes rather than lose them. We kind of see the Carnotaurus in the films, and obviously Toro, they're kind of bruisers as well. Like they seem to be fighting most chances they get. The ones in the films are a lot more robust. They probably take that a lot more. I think the real life one probably wouldn't have gone after everything.
I was going to ask you about that. I was going to say, in real life, would Carnotaurus be able to survive a fall off of a cliff?
It's too soon. Too soon. It's the saddest scene
Poor
ever.
Toro.
I had to.
Poor Toro.
Poor Toro. A cliff. Explosion. A brainwashing incident. That poor dinosaur. It's all right though. He makes it. If you listen to Tales from a Jurassic World.
Nice little plug. I didn't even have to do the plug myself. Oh, okay, so we've established that it might not survive a cliff fall. That's fine. What about surviving fire? Is that happening?
So, there's no real way to test that 100%. I don't even think you'd want to, look at Monday analogies because that brings into a whole bit of ethics if you're kind of researching that. But what's really, really cool is with Carnotaurus is that we have found skin impressions on that specimen, which is really cool. It was the first theropod that was found with quite a high amount of skin impressions, which were found on the second expedition. So, its skin in the films, along with the Majungasaurus, is quite a rough texture with like lots of these kinds of like bony protrusions and stuff. So those would have been on the real life creature. So these kind of larger bumps, they didn't contain bone like you might find on like a crocodile, which are called osteoderms. But they would have been up to 5 centimeters in size, so that's quite big for like these large kind of tough scales. They were found kind of all across its neck, its back, and its tail, and the rest of its scales would have been quite neat and quite small. But those bumps, those would have been kind of randomly kind of distributed across its body.
Interesting.
Whereas in the films and stuff, they're kind of like in rows along its back, which is how Carnotaurus has been depicted for a long time. So it wouldn't have been like fully armored or have like those rows of spikes like we see, but it did have big kind of bumps. So that's one thing that you can see as being inspired by the paleontology. And they've obviously, made it into like a cool creature design, but that's, they've kind of based it on some things from the fossil record.
There is some background to that. That is really cool. And I mean, on that, talking about colours, there's a big elephant in the room, or rather, there's a big Abelisaur in the room.
Yeah.
And that is the fact that in the Lost World novel, the Carnotaurus can camouflage.
Oh, yes.
And that is something which I think so many of us wish was carried across into the films.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm assuming there's no scientific basis for that, right?
Sadly not, no. That is one of the coolest scenes in both of the novels. It's iconic, and the fact they put that in the Lost World arcade game is so cool.
Yeah.
It's the scene that's 400,000 fan arts and stuff. But yeah, no, absolutely no evidence for that, sadly. It in the novel as well, it's an interesting one because the immediate kind of comparison you want to draw is a chameleon, right? Because that's a reptile, and they even gave the one in the Lost World game like chameleon eyes and stuff, which is really cool. But chameleons can't camo to mimic their surroundings. That's cuttlefish, which we get a reference to with Indominus Rex in Jurassic World, which is really cool. So yeah, not for Carnotaurus, sadly, but I'm really glad that made it into the films in some way with the Indominus Rex.
Yeah.
And probably made a bit more sense there because that was like an engineered hybrid, essentially.
Yeah, it's something where it makes sense for it to appear, isn't it? That's cool.
Also, just while we're talking about skin, I just want to shout out like a thing that I feel can't be a coincidence, but the patterns for the Carnotaurus in the films, the one in Dominion and in one scene of Fallen Kingdom looks like the Demon Carno, right? It's black with red on it. And then the one in Fallen Kingdom and like Tora and stuff, it's like a dark browny orange with like brown kind of splotches. That's the bone crusher from the Lost World toy line. I can't help but feel that they looked at the two toys that exist for this dinosaur and they gave it those colors, which is really cool. I want that to be true. I don't know if that's true, but I want that to be true.
Well, anyone from Mattel, if you are listening to this segment, please do feel free to join us for a Dino DNA section where I'm sure Connor would like to ask you about the physiology of your toys, getting away from screw holes and implementing real feel skin.
I mean, they're pretty much bossing it on that front, thankfully.
Yeah.
Just one last thing about skin as well. I really like to see what they did with the Majungasaurus in Chaos Theory.
Yeah.
It's got much neater scales, but it also has very speculative, kind of like iguana-like line of spines on its back. So very lizard-inspired, but it makes it have its own unique look. And yeah,
it does.
Very lizard-like, which is cool.
Yeah, it doesn't look like anything else in the Jurassic franchise either, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah.
Especially this far in, right? When we've seen this many dinosaurs at this point, doing something that feels visually distinctive is quite a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think we're kind of coming to the end now, but there was one other thing that I wanted to briefly talk about, and that was speed. When it comes to Carnotaurus. So
has Hammond clocked the Carnotaurus speed?
Oh my god! I wish he had. How fast was the T-Rex clocked at 30, 35 miles? Oh, no, it was the Raptors.
Yeah, I was thinking like 60.
60? That's crazy.
Yeah. Let me see. 32 miles per hour.
32. The T-Rex was too fast. We spoke about that. Also, that was referencing last episode. It was a banger. Just listen to it if you haven't. But yeah, so because Carnotaurus in real life had very, very quite thin legs, and it probably was quite a fast theropod. So would have been quite good at short bursts. And then also it had very special muscle attachments to keep its tail stiff while running, which would help support and balance it, because it doesn't have arms to help counterbalance. So that was really, really important. But because it kind of over-specialized in that kind of keeping the tail stiff, it meant it would have been really bad at turning, most likely, when it was chasing things. And I'm pretty sure that Darius says something like that when they're running from Toro in Camp Cretaceous. I think he says something like, run from side to side or something. And that's a really cool thing if they did put that in.
It's a cool reference. It's cool to think that they've gone that far with it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's nice that like there's some things in Camp Cretaceous that are a bit funny, but like they do put in some like really deep cuts, which is really nice to see. It's like you can tell they really care when they're making it, and they want to make it a fun experience for kids to like discover these animals and like find out some little facts that they can show off and stuff, which is what like Jurassic is all about. So that's really cool.
It's interesting thinking about it, because I feel like there might even have been a scene with Toro slowing down at a corner at one point.
Yeah, I really think like when they're in the underground tunnels and stuff.
Yes, I have something in my head.
They've kept that in mind, which is really cool. Yeah, just nice attention to detail. Really nice attention to detail.
Conor.
Yeah?
There's one thing left.
Oh yeah,
my
go
friend.
for it.
And that is DINO DNA.
It's time for the rating. It's time for the rating.
If you need me back on every episode to do that impression just let me know.
It's better than Colin Trevorrow's in Jurassic World. We need to get this guy in Rebirth stat. Dino DNA rating for these. So I think overall they're recognizable, right? It's like that you can tell it's these two species. They're quite recognizable. However, they've beefed them up quite a bit in terms of the size, especially with the Carnotaurus. So I'd say for Majunga, it's going to edge out. It's going to be a bit more intact in terms of its DNA rating. I'd say about 80% of its genome is intact, maybe 85. There's just a few small things like the size, and then it's the iguana-like spines and stuff. But otherwise looks really good. Carnotaurus, I'm going to go lower. I'm going to go 70, 75. So still quite high.
See, I was going to say the poor Carno's getting toasted, but unfortunately Toro already did that.
He's already got that award. Oh no, that poor Toro. Oh, he can't catch a break. Yeah, I think overall 70, 75. It's a bit big, bit robust. It feels like they've mixed in some T-Rex, feels like they've mixed in some T-Rex. I get that. And a bit of crocodile to give it that kind of hard skin and stuff. But yeah. Overall, really, really great, iconic designs, both of them.
Yeah.
And some really nice attention to detail to the paleontology as well.
I do have a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
Actually, before we round out this episode.
Yeah.
Which is, what Abelisaur would you want to see appear next?
Great question. So it would be, I think I've already said it, so it'd be cheating to say I'd love to see Majungasaurus in live action. But barring that, if we were going for a completely new one, I would probably go for Rajasaurus, because it was quite a big one. It was one of the larger ones. And it was quite distinct compared to these two as well. It didn't have the two horns or the kind of like single horn in the middle. Had a bit of a different kind of body and skull shape. So it would be distinct enough, because as far as I'm concerned, these are the two most iconic ones. Yeah. And I'd be happy with it being these two. So if you're going to add a third, it needs to be different enough.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, two great dinosaurs. And a great episode. So I hope everyone's enjoyed listening. Thank you, as always, for listening to mine and Tom's ramblings.
Yes, thank you for bearing with the pronunciations or lack thereof.
And also, really do apologise for any Toro stands who are going to take the barbecue jokes a bit too harshly.
Yeah. What can I say? I feel like Toro got a bit skewered this episode.
Oh. And with that, we're going to round out Dino DNA for this week. Please do let us know what you think about the show. You can follow me at Conor Ontology on Instagram, Blue Sky as well. And Tom, where can everyone find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at Tom Jurassic on X currently, but I don't know for how much longer. Also on Blue Sky and Instagram.
Great, fantastic. And thanks so much for listening in, everyone. And we'll be sure to catch you on the next episode of the Jurassic Park podcast. Bye for now.
Life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is. There it is. I'm simply saying that life, finds a way.
That'll do it for another episode of the Jurassic Park podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you for listening and sharing in our love of dinosaurs and, of course, the Jurassic franchise. A huge thank you goes out to Conor O'Keefe for bringing us another episode of Dino DNA. It's a great segment. I love that we've had it on this show for so long now. I had to go back and look, and I think the first iteration of Dino DNA with Conor was back in, I think, 2020. That's at least as far as I can tell right here on my spreadsheet. I think Conor was on a little bit earlier than that at some point during his initial Dino DNA episode, but his first appearance for Dino DNA was with Tom Jurassic as well. So it's great to see the two of them still continuing to talk about dinosaurs all these years. So love having you guys, love having Dino DNA on the podcast. So I hope everybody else out there loves it and learned a little bit more about some of the favorite species here that we have for the Jurassic franchise. So as always, thank you guys. But thank you, of course, to our podcast host, Podomatic, for giving us a place to upload the podcast each and every week. Everybody out there, please stay safe. Be kind. Let's continue to fight for representation, change, and equality in the Jurassic franchise, but more importantly, outside of it, in the real world. Let's continue to make the world a better place here in 2025. But I am going to go ahead and hand things off to myself for the outro. Take it away.
Saddle up, let's get this movable feast underway.
Continue the conversation with us on Threads and Instagram. Watch our content on TikTok and YouTube. Find us on the web at JurassicParkPodcast.com. You'll find today's episode show notes, articles, contributor bios, and so much more. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, our website, and wherever else podcasts are found. So please be sure to follow along and share with your friends, family, and fellow Jurassic fans. If you haven't already, please give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We will read your Apple reviews at the end of most episodes, so be sure to spare no expense. Don't miss our Wednesday night live streams, toy hunts, reviews, in-depth bonus content, gameplay, event and theme park coverage on our YouTube channel. If you want to get a hold of us or participate in the Jurassic mailbag, you can fill out the contact form on our website or send emails and MP3s to JurassicParkPod@gmail.com. Feel free to call our voicemail line at any time to leave us a message or just to say hi. That number is 732-825-7763. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, enjoy.